Hey guys, in this video we will find out if a cheap airbrush and compressor combo is good enough to paint minis. Can you jump into airbrushing for cheap, or do you need the expensive stuff to get really good results? Let's find out. Airbrushing is a side of the mini painting hobby that seems to have a pretty high barrier of entry. Not only do you need to learn a completely new tool and find a place to use it, but airbrushes and compressors from well-known brands are not exactly cheap either. But there are more affordable options out there. You don't have to buy a fancy branded airbrush and a big expensive compressor from the get-go. The question is, will you be able to use these cheaper alternatives just as effectively, or will it be a pain and ultimately money out of the window? Well, a couple of weeks ago, one of these airbrush manufacturers, GAAHLERI, reached out to me offering me a chance to try out some of their more affordable entry-level kits. A mini compressor, the GTS-6 that comes with an airbrush included, plus one of their mid-tier airbrushes, the GHAD 39. Normally, I use a combination of a relatively cheap but big and sturdy compressor and some branded and quite expensive airbrushes, like the Harder & Steenbeck Infinity and the Evolution. But I know that a lot of people are looking for a slightly more palatable combo when they are considering jumping into this side of the hobby. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to test if I can recommend a simple, affordable kit when people ask me what airbrush to get. Then this is what we are going to do. I will show you quickly what GAAHLERI sent me and what you get inside the boxes, and then we will field test it. I will paint a mini from scratch using only the compressor and the airbrushes I got without resorting to any of my more expensive tools. I will prime, do a Zenithal, Basecoat, highlight and shade, glaze and paint effects, and in the end, speaking based on this experience, I will be able to tell you if these tools are good enough to invest in. Full disclosure, GAAHLERI sent these products to me for free, but without any strings attached. I can say whatever I want about them, so you will get my honest opinion based on the experience I had with them during the painting session. And if you want to buy these or any other GAAHLERI products, they also provided me with a personal link and a discount code that you can find in the video description. If you purchase something through that link, I get a little kickback from that without any additional cost to you, so that is a great way to support the channel. Oh, and I was told that the discount code stacks with any ongoing sales, like the big Black Friday sale that is going on right now. So if you want to get these affordable tools even cheaper, now it is probably a good time. Alright, let's see what's in the boxes and then let's see what we can accomplish with them. And let's check out the compressor kit first. This one comes with a mini compressor, its power adapter, 2 attachable airbrush holders, a hose, and with an actual airbrush with a 0.38mm nozzle included in the box. The compressor is tiny. It's 18 cm by 11 cm or 8 by 4.5 inches for people on the other side of the Great Pond. If you compare this to my daily driver compressor, it's absolutely dwarfed by it. You could probably fit this into a bigger trouser pocket, although I am not sure why you would want to do that. You can turn it on and change the pressure with a couple of convenient buttons on the top, and you can actually connect 2 separate airbrushes at the same time. I'm not sure why you would want to do that either, but I tried it and it works. What this cute little thing doesn't have is an air tank, which is one of the reasons it can be so small. Will this be a problem? We will talk about that later. The airbrush that comes in the starter kit is the simplest model GAAHLERI has, one step below the mid-range one that came in a separate box, so let's open that one up as well and take a look at both airbrushes. The mid-range one is the GHAD 39 and it's a pretty handsome fellow just looking at it. It comes with 2 options. You can use the smaller 0.35mm needle and the smaller cup, or the larger 0.5mm needle and the bigger cup if you want to paint something bigger. Us mini painters can simply stick with the smaller pre-installed needle, but it doesn't hurt to have the options. And when you compare the 2 airbrushes, you can see that they are quite similar. The only difference is the back of the airbrush has the needle exposed on the mid-range one, but it's hidden on the basic one. I'll use both in this video and I'll let you know if I can feel a difference in how they perform. And in terms of build quality and finish, honestly they look and feel quite well put together. They are all metal with the appropriate heft I expect, and the trigger action is nice and smooth on both. Maybe a tiny bit better on the mid-range model, but I might just imagine that. Okay, let's set this up so I can try what these things can do and to find out how much space is needed and how loud the compressor is. Setting this kit up is super easy. You set the compressor on the table, or under it if you want, connect the power supply, connect one end of the hose to one of the outlets and the other to the airbrush, press the power button and start spraying. Oh, and you can change the pressure in 5 preset levels. High if you want to spray something thicker, like a primer, and low when you are glazing. It takes up barely any space at all, so even people with not a lot of hobby space can easily use it. Is it loud though? Well, since it doesn't have a tank, it will start up as soon as you press the trigger on the airbrush and start releasing air. And it is not exactly silent, but it's much less loud than my big compressor, and the vibrations are completely fine even on a tabletop. It was right next to me on the table for this whole project, and it didn't bother me at all. The little plastic airbrush holders are also quite convenient, giving you a place to put down the airbrush when you need to pause but you still have paint in the cup. Alright, now that we know how it looks and how to set it up, it's time to actually spray some stuff. Let's start from the basics and do some priming first. This is one of the underappreciated things about airbrushes. Once you own one, you don't have to buy those expensive rattle cans to prime your figures, and you don't have to worry about the weather, the humidity, and all the ways you can mess up your minis with them. But what I would advise you to get is a spray booth, because you don't want paint particles in your room or in your lungs. Acrylic paints are not inherently toxic, but they are not healthy to breathe in, so you need some way to exhaust them, and please always wear a mask when spraying. You can find a link and a discount code in the video description for the airbrush booth that I use if you want to get a good one, and there are multiple guides on the channel about airbrushing, so give those a watch if you are new to this. To be honest, I didn't expect any issues with the priming process when it comes to these airbrushes. It's one of the simplest things you can do with them. I was more interested in how the compressor would behave with no tank attached and how well I could regulate the paint flow with it. And at this stage everything seemed to be working perfectly fine. There is a super small delay between pushing down the trigger and the air flowing when you first start, but you get used to that quickly, and mostly it goes away since there is usually still some air and pressure in the hose, which bridges the gap between pressing the trigger and the compressor engaging. I was using the simpler airbrush for this step, the one that comes in the starter kit, and it worked perfectly as well. The paint came out smooth and went exactly where I aimed it, and the trigger worked smoothly and well. Next I did a Zenithal highlight with a white primer on top of the black one. This requires a tiny bit more control, but it's still a very easy and basic task. And no surprises here either, both the airbrush and the compressor worked perfectly fine and the highlight went on smoothly, just as I expected. Alright, let's increase the difficulty a little. I switched to the mid-range airbrush to give it a try as well, and I started doing the base coats and the highlights on the model. From this point on I was alternating between the two airbrushes kinda randomly. First I sprayed the base coat on the undercarriage of the Dune Crawler with a true metallic paint, which can be a bit more tricky than normal acrylics, but it went on like a charm. Next I did something a little bit more complicated. First I sprayed a darker bluish red on the bottom of all the panels up until the halfway point and faded it out in the middle. Then I used the primary red to cover all the rest of the armor, and finally I sprayed a more orangish mix on the top third of the model, effectively creating a transition from dark purple shadows to red midtones and orangish highlights. And at this point I noticed that there is actually a disadvantage of not having a tank, but it's much less noticeable than I thought. Normally, when I press down the trigger, the tank gives me immediate full pressure, and since I'm used to this, I tend to press down on the trigger for air and pull it back almost in a single motion. And that is not good practice, even on a compressor with a tank. It's lazy and it can lead to speckling on the surface you are painting, but on my usual kit, I can get away with it. But this is easily fixed with proper trigger discipline. First pushing down and only then pulling back and releasing the paint, and as soon as I noticed that, I was completely fine. And I must say that the end result came out great. The armor looks nice and smooth and super vibrant. At this point I switched to a brush to paint in all the little details on the model. I did a nice messy oil shading step to get more contrast and to make the model more weathered looking, and of course I painted edge highlights everywhere. If you are curious how I did these steps, there will be a PDF guide and lots of real-time painting footage on my Patreon. You can find the link in the video description. Okay, so we can do base coats and some basic highlights with no issues, but what if we need to be way more precise? Let's paint the glow effect on the plasma gun. For this I loaded a green ink undiluted into the airbrush and I sprayed it on the coils, covering them fully with multiple thin coats. Plus I also hit everything that is close to the coils a little, but didn't cover them as opaquely to make it look like the light is spilling out. I also sprayed this green on the other colors and elements around the gun where the light coming from the gun would be reflected as an OSL effect. Then I painted the coils white using a brush so I can have a bright undercoat to work with once again. This time I loaded a fluorescent green ink into the airbrush and sprayed this over the whole coil assembly, but especially on the bits I painted white. And again I sprayed this on the other elements around the gun as well, but now in a smaller area, only in the close proximity of the coils. Now it was time to do something scary. I loaded some white airbrush paint mixed with only a tiny bit of thinner, and I shot this carefully in the middle of the coils only. This requires a lot more control and precision than anything else before. If I overdo it or the airbrush misbehaves, I can ruin everything that I have done so far. But I didn't. With a little care I managed to place the glow highlight in the middle without obscuring too much of the previous green. Now I used fluorescent yellow to complete the glow effect covering the white area I had just created, but there I actually messed up a little. Not with the gun, that came out nicely, but when I was finishing the OSL on the front hull, I forgot two things. So far I had been using inks, which are super thin and easy to shoot, so I was using a low pressure setting on the compressor. But I thinned this acrylic fluo paint with airbrush thinner and I managed to make it a little thicker than it should be. And that would have been fine, but then I messed up the trigger discipline thing as well. Everything was going so well that I forgot that I wasn't using my regular setup. And the result is a slightly grainy, dusty texture I created on the glow effect on the front of the hull. Not a biggie, and I managed to mostly fix it with a little glazing and a couple of layers of varnish, but it's still annoying. It was mostly my own mistake though. Finally, I wanted to try out one more thing, a little bit of shading and filtering, another easy but super cool thing you can do with an airbrush. So I diluted some purple ink a little and I sprayed it at an angle from the bottom, mostly on the lower half of the panels, where originally I used a purplish red shadow color. I did this mostly to darken things down a notch and add a little more contrast and moodiness. This is quite transparent, so it didn't obscure anything, it just added a darker purplish filter on top. I did some more highlighting and I built and painted a scenic base for this little critter as well, where the airbrush also played an important role, but I won't bore you with that, it's time to draw a conclusion. So, is a cheap airbrush kit enough for the average painter, or is there a huge gap between something like this and the more expensive tools? While I was doing this project, most of the time I completely forgot that I'm not using my big boy compressor and fancy airbrushes. I could do everything I usually do with an airbrush and I didn't really feel that I am at a disadvantage at all. The only issue I encountered was the one with the speckling when you are not using proper trigger discipline, but that is something that you can easily get used to and work around. Is a big compressor with a tank better? Yes, but the difference is much smaller than I thought. Can you be more precise with a more expensive airbrush? Absolutely, but that only becomes more significant when you do super intricate work that most beginners or even intermediate painters won't likely attempt. So if you want to try out airbrushing, or if you need a small and affordable kit, then I think this starter set from GAAHLERI is a great entry point, and now with the Black Friday deal and my discount code STAGGED, you can get it for around 70 euros, which is a pretty nice price I think. And as for the two airbrushes, honestly I could barely tell the difference between them. Both of them work quite well out of the box and you can do all the steps you saw me doing in this video with both. But for 30 euros after discounts, the mid-range one is a great value for that price. And GAAHLERI also has some really nice looking higher end airbrushes on their website, and they are also much cheaper than the big brands, so I would love to test out some of them and see how they compare. Maybe next time. Alright, I hope this video will help some of you guys get into airbrushing. It's one of my favorite parts of mini painting and I think more people should give it a try. Thanks for GAAHLERI for sending me this set. If you guys are interested in buying anything from them, don't forget to use the link and the discount code in the video description. If you like the video, do me a solid and subscribe, like and comment. It really helps with the algorithm showing it to other people. And check out my Patreon for some awesome painting guides and long-form painting videos. And as usual, before I sign off, I wanted to thank my Patreon members for all their support. Without them, this channel wouldn't exist, and that is especially true for the ones in the captain level. Thank you guys, see you in the next one.